Sonny Rollins is of course a very influential saxophone player. He really has his own path and also almost his own part of jazz history. I'm not sure if he's still playing. He came in at the end of bebop and then evolved with jazz into hard bop. And in this video I'm going to take a look at some phrases from his solo on the B-flat Blues Tenor Madness, which he actually plays together with Coltrane. And in there I'm going to especially focus on how he's using reharmonization, how he's messing around with the chords, but he's not just playing lines on the chords and then just changing them to create another sound. He's really using the other changes to create longer stories within his solo. I think that's really the way you want to do this, and this is a great example of it. And then there's of course also just a bunch of really great bebop lines in there. My name is Jens Larsen. If you want to learn jazz and make music, then subscribe to my channel and click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This first example is in fact the entire second chorus of the solo, and already here he starts changing the harmony. And there are two places where one, he's maybe hinting at it a bit and using it in a melodic way, and then there's another example here right at the beginning where I'm not sure if he's really thinking about it. I think his way of approaching these reharmonizations is probably pretty intuitive. But what we have here is that he starts off the solo with just a B-flat major triad melody, so that's just first inversion, root position, B-flat major. And from here he moves on, where we normally have an E-flat 7, he plays, which is an F7 or an F9 arpeggio. It is the question of if he's really thinking about this. I think with some people you can really hear that reharmonizations they're using are sort of really a conscious choice. They really thought about other progressions that they can put on top of what they're playing. In this case, that's really the question if Rollins does this. There are other examples of blues themes where they actually have, instead of having a 4 in the second bar, they'll play a 2-5. So you have something like a B-flat to C minor F7 B-flat. Most famous one is probably Chi-Chi from Parker. From here he moves into an altered line, which I think is also clear that he's coming out of the bebop tradition and he's probably thinking more in terms of chord tones and leading notes than really like an altered scale. Because the first thing is more or less like a diminished idea. So we get first a diminished A-flat triad and then moving up to the G, and then really moving into something where we get the G-flat, which is more like an E7 almost, and then taking that into the E-flat. And then ending on the E-flat 7. Before he goes back to B-flat, he just plays this chromatic enclosure of the F. And then really just playing F and D. Now here on the B-flat 7, he kind of starts a melody that he takes through a few bars in the solo, and he's using a quite simple motif. The first is just coming out on the low A-flat on the G7, and then up to the sharp 9, and then resolving that down to the 5th of the C minor. And then he repeats this idea on the F7 and also on the B-flat 7. So really what might be happening here is a little bit as if he's going to, instead of going to a B-flat 7, and he's really kind of thinking D minor 7 to G7 altered, C minor 7 to F7 altered, and then to B-flat 7. Now the advantage to this is that he's creating sort of a melodic phrase that is not sort of tied into the blues form in the same way. So he's using some motifs, but he's also using the new changes to kind of go away from just playing a predictable form in the melody, and that makes it work a little bit better and make it a little bit more surprising, and in that way also a little bit stronger. And I think that's quite clever. There is a place in the Gilad Hexelman solo that I also analyzed that's quite similar to this. The next two examples are both on how Rollins works with getting from the E-flat in bar 5 to the C minor in bar 9 and really changing the harmony in that part, because he does that in a few different ways. And one is, I think, pretty common, and the other one is maybe a little bit forgotten, maybe a little bit old-fashioned, but they're both really beautiful and he handles it really well. This first variation has Rollins playing from the 4 chord and then down to the 2 chord using a fairly simple tonal progression, which is maybe a little bit more old-fashioned, and he also improvises over it in that way. So he's not really going sort of for the E flat 7 as a dominant chord. He's really staying much closer to home. It's much more in the triad, lower in the chord. But he's still playing a really nice melody on this, and it's kind of using one sort of chromatic melody and then another voice that's 2 pedal notes on top of it. And it's quite subtle, so it's a very nice idea. So the first part of it is really on the E flat, which he's kind of playing like an E flat 6, and that's... Then he moves to E flat minor 6, to B flat with D in the bass, to D flat diminished, and then down to C minor. So we kind of have this idea of the G down to G flat to F and then to E and then to E flat on the C minor, and then on top of that, it's not there all the time, but he's kind of messing around with the B flat and the C and keeping that as a constant, and that will of course also work. So you have that this kind of idea. I think that's a really nice thing to check out and also to start working with. It's not very common. Usually when we reharmonize like this, we'll go for the parallel minor chords and Dorian everywhere kind of solution, which works as well, but this is an elegant version as well. The next variation is then the more common one, where he's really using E flat 7 to E flat minor 7 to D minor 7, and then because I'm interpreting a note as a wrong note, he's also playing a D flat minor 7 down to C minor. And he's actually using, again, like a motivic idea. The first part is just the 2-5 leading into the E flat 7, so, and really coming out on the G and down to the D flat, so we have the E flat 7 sound. And then on all the minor chords that follow, so the E flat, D minor and D flat, he's really emphasizing the 7th. So really... And then in this case turning it into like a 3/4 motif that he can then move. So first it's on the 2, on the D minor, and then on the D flat minor. And then here, I'm not sure exactly how to interpret this, but he actually plays a D here, and it should be probably either a D flat or an E flat. It's hard to say. I think it's a wrong note essentially, and that he is really just playing down to the C minor. But of course, if you don't agree with me and you have another explanation, then you can just leave a comment on this video. From here he moves on into the 2-5, again sticking with the idea of emphasizing the 7th, so the B flat. And then here on the F7 he's playing an altered line, and I think here it's not so much just playing some loose alterations of top of the chord. He is really thinking of either a B7 or an F7 altered kind of sound, so which is really just an F sharp minor or G flat minor, as I've written it, idea. The last few examples I'm going to cover here are really going to illustrate how I think Rollins is thinking when he's creating the lines, because I think similar to what I talked about in the video where I'm analyzing a George Benson solo, he's really thinking about the basic triad and then some leading notes. But that also really helps him create some very interesting, very surprising sounding lines. And it's quite clear that he didn't just sit around and practice some bebop scales and running up and down those. The other thing that I think it illustrates quite well is that he is very often, and I already mentioned this, he's not really thinking B flat 7 very often. He's thinking about blues in B flat, and he's maybe also thinking about an E flat, but not necessarily a dominant chord. And that means that it's a lot lower in the chords, a lot more triad based, and sometimes he'll also just, instead of playing a B flat 7, really play B flat major and play a B flat major 7. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over there, I can also give you something in return for your support. The first part of this line is really just created using a B-flat major triad and then adding chromaticism to that. So first we get him encircling the fifth of the chord, so the F, then going the opposite direction but still just encircling the third, and then we get sort of chromatic movement from B-flat to A-flat and then back to the B-flat. Then he skips up to the G and then really just uses that to go to the E-flat and really just hitting the E-flat on the 1. And then we get this line on the E-flat 7. So here, I guess the A is kind of a leading note. You could of course also just look at this and say, well, he's playing a Lydian dominant on the E-flat 7. I don't really think he's thinking of it like that. I think he is really thinking more in terms of either notes from B-flat major or leading notes to the chord tones. So a leading note to the fifth of the E-flat. So here really spelling out the 7th down to the 5th again, and then we get again just leading notes to the B-flat to go back to B-flat 7, and then down the triad, and then a scale 1. So similar to what I was talking about in the George Benson video, the use of sort of different chromatic approaches to chord tones really means that you can make lines that will skip around a lot more and be a lot less predictable, and that works really well for these bebop lines, because if you're just running up and down a scale, then it gets a lot more boring to listen to. And just to give you two examples that are coming more out of a B-flat major 7 sound on the B-flat, here's one from the first chorus. So here he's really using a D minor 7 arpeggio on the B-flat, and then going up to the G here, and then a few choruses later we get, so here we really have sort of the emphasis on the 7th also, and this is in the final turnaround of the chorus, and then an alto dominant, and then in the new chorus again also a melody that's really much more just B-flat triad and leading notes going into something that is only an E-flat major triad. I already mentioned how some of the lines that Rollins is playing here are really similar to how George Benson improvises on Billy's Bounce. If you want to check out the video where I'm analyzing that solo, then you can do so here. If you have ideas for other artists that I should do a video on, then leave a comment on this video. Thank you for watching.